But we'll begin with the sponsor of LD 231 and recognize Senator Maxman. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Lucchini, Representative Chiazzo, and honorable members of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee. My name is Chloe Maxman. I represent Senate District 13, which is all of Lincoln County except for Dresden, plus Washington and Windsor, a total of 27 towns in the Mid-Coast. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of LD 231, an act to establish open primaries. This bill would allow unenrolled voters to vote in a party primary of their choice without having to join the party. They could only vote in one primary, and it does not allow Democrats to vote in Republican primaries or vice versa. For this reason, this is more accurately described as a semi-open primary model. I introduced this bill for two reasons. The first is that I promised my constituents. My district is almost a third, Democrat, Republican, and Independent. Countless unenrolled voters on the campaign trail lamented how they could not vote in a party primary. Their taxes pay for these elections, but they can't participate. They will vote on the primary winner in the November general election, but they have no say on who that candidate will be. This is how I fight for their voices. The second reason why I introduced this is a little bit more conceptual, but it motivates me nonetheless. I've knocked on around 20,000 doors in the past 3 years, including over 13,000 just last year. So I've talked with a lot of Mainers, and the number one thing that I have heard from people is a deep frustration with our political system that leaves our constituents feeling unheard, unrepresented, and excluded. We all work hard in this building, but there is still so much more work to do to restore faith in our democracy. Semi-open primaries is one of the major ways that we can do this in Maine. I know that semi-open primaries are not top of mind for the most exciting bill of the session, but I truly see this as one of the simplest and most profound ways that we can build a more inclusive democracy in Maine at a time when people are desperate for more voice in government. This was one of the key recommendations in Democracy Maine's 2021 report titled State of Maine Democracy. They write, as of November 2020, 31.9% of active Maine voters had an unenrolled party status. This significant portion of Maine voters is unable to participate in Maine's primary elections. Here are some of the reasons why semi-open primaries are needed. Number one, automatic voter registration is about to come online in Maine. Oregon is another state that has recently switched to AVR. From 2016, when AVR was enacted in Oregon, to December 2019, 80% of Oregon voters registered via AVR as unenrolled. Nationwide, 49% of veterans and 50% of millennials are unenrolled voters. All of this is to say there are currently and will be thousands of unenrolled voters who are left out of the primary process because they choose to stay unaffiliated. This to me is unacceptable for democracy and a state that strives to be representative. A key point here is the importance of primaries. Why are primaries so important in this conversation? In so many districts, primaries are the only election that matters. In Maine, 65 to 70% of Maine legislative races are determined in the primary. So independent voters are completely excluded from these huge decisions across the state. You might wonder what would happen if independents voted in primaries. I really like primaries. I think that they are vital for the political process to discuss the issues and candidates thoughtfully and thoroughly. And I say this as someone who has been through a primary. Including unenrolled voters in these conversations will make those dialogues more robust, more inclusive, and more representative of our districts. I also see this as a way to remedy the extreme divisiveness in our democracy. Primaries will become less about who best represents a party ideology and more about who represents the district. Let me address a few arguments that I've heard against semi-open primaries. One of the big ones is that someone should just register if they want to vote in a primary. Voting in a primary is the earned privilege of having a D or an R next to your name. To this, I say, why do we have to be so exclusive with this privilege? Why wouldn't we welcome eager and interested voters into our party? In fact, I predict that including unenrolled voters in a primary could increase voter turnout in November for the candidate that they choose. Also, independents are independent for a reason. Why would we ask people to forsake that identity? Another argument is that semi-open primaries could be used to maliciously skew an outcome, urging conservative independents to sway a vote against a certain Democrat or progressive independents to influence a Republican primary. But this can happen in Maine already, and it has under our closed primary system. Voters can switch parties 15 days before the election and under our current law and theoretically skew a primary, or they can show up on primary day to enroll and sway a vote. So semi-open primaries would not change this landscape. I ask the committee to not let fear drive our decisions on this one. There have been some valid concerns brought to me by the Democratic Party around ballot tracking and delegate counts. I have included amendments to solve these problems that I have sent to your clerk. My amendments do three things. First, it would require the election clerk to track which party's ballot is given to an unenrolled voter. So there'll be some history and record of that. The Second Amendment provides that an unenrolled voter who participates in the party's primary election must be considered a member of the party for purposes of selecting and allocating delegates. And the Democratic Party has said that this alleviates their concerns about the open primary model. And my third amendment is pushing the effective date of this bill to January 1st, 2024, which I did after a conversation with the Secretary of State. In the past week, this bill has been endorsed by Congressman Jared Golden, the Portland Press Herald, the Ellsworth American, and the Mount Desert Islander. There are dozens of Mainers in support. We've asked a few key voices to speak to you today, but most of the amazing supportive testimony is written to respect your time and focus. A couple other things before I wrap up. I know Senator Pouliot is a co-sponsor of this bill, and he was going to join us today, but is doing a ribbon cutting for his new office, so for his real estate business, so he could not be here, but submitted written testimony in support. And I also saw the Secretary of State's testimony and wanted to reiterate what she wrote, which is that we are willing to work with her office to make the bill language fit the needs there. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Senator Maxman. Any questions from the committee at this time? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. So next we'll recognize the sponsor of LD 303, and that is Representative Lookner. Welcome.
Morning. Thank you, Senator Lucchini, Representative Chiazzo, honorable colleagues on the Committee of Veterans and Legal Affairs. My name is Grayson Lookner, and I represent part of Portland. I'm here today to present LD 303, an act to establish semi-open primaries to allow unenrolled voters to participate. Maine has been and continues to be an innovator when it comes to election reform. We value the voices of all of our residents, regardless of their political connections or their economic clout. As a result, we have high rates of voter and civic participation, and that is something we should all be very proud of about our state. And both our state and our municipal governments are stronger because of it. We are also a state that embraces political independence, and we frequently elect candidates to both state and federal offices who are not enrolled with a political party. These candidates are often ideologically diverse, just like our state, although they frequently face obstacles that candidates who are not enrolled, or excuse me, who are enrolled with one of the two major parties do not face. One intractable aspect of our political system in modern times has been the reality that two parties dominate, and too often, instead of legislating and governing together for the betterment of our state, we end up in a perpetual campaign cycle, working more to deny the other party's success rather than getting things done for our constituents. I see two reasons for this. Firstly, the two major parties do not allow a broad swath of the electorate to participate in their primaries, which are conducted using public resources and taxpayer dollars. Although the vast majority of the time our leaders will be selected from one of the two major parties, unenrolled voters have their wills denied because they cannot vote in the primaries. If they were allowed to do so, I am confident that we would end up with leaders who better represent their entire constituencies. Secondly, smaller political parties face systemic barriers to inclusion, especially in statewide races. In order to qualify for statewide office as a member of a party, currently a candidate must collect signatures from at least 2,000 voters registered with that party, a nearly impossible task for a party that counts only 5,000 members statewide. This is a section of my testimony I want to focus on this morning because you heard in Senator Maxman's bill a lot of the merits of establishing open primaries. I also want to speak to my belief that currently parties are allowed to determine which voters they can permit into to vote in their primary. So in my mind, the parties should be allowed to determine which voters they want to sign their ballot access petitions. So this is an amendment that I've submitted here to allow unenrolled voters. If a party determines they wish to allow unenrolled voters to sign their ballot access petitions, they should be allowed to do so. Currently, a party can determine if they allow unenrolled voters to vote in their primaries. They should also be allowed to have unenrolled voters sign their ballot access petitions if they determine that that's the route they want to go. Can we really claim that we have a full democracy when we deny participation to unenrolled voters in primaries and systematically block other parties from qualifying for the ballot? In my mind, the answer is no. In this bill, and my proposed amendments would rectify this issue simply by allowing unenrolled voters to vote in the major party primaries and also allowing other smaller parties ballot access by letting those parties determine whether or not they can have unenrolled voters sign their ballot access petitions. A last amendment I've proposed, and I'll let kind of the committee determine whether or not this is really feasible, is to allow for electronic signatures to be gathered for political candidates for ballot access, similarly to how signatures are gathered and verified electronically for the Maine Clean Election System. Especially during a pandemic in which social distancing is the primary method of preserving public health, it is unsafe and irresponsible to mandate that candidates go out in public in order to gather signatures for ballot access. Additionally, this change would allow people with disabilities, especially mobility issues, easier access to the ballot. It's time that Maine join the 21st century and allow for electronic ballot access. I'm a Democrat because I believe in quote unquote little d democracy. It is less often that we hear about little r republicanism, which means to be against monarchy and for a system of government controlled by we the people. Allowing unenrolled voters to fully participate in primary elections moves us more fully towards those American ideals. Thank you for hearing my testimony, and I will do my best to answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative Lookner. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you all.
So we're going to hold off on 1121 while we track down the primary bill sponsor, but we will recognize Representative Gorhauski. She's registered for 231, but you obviously have the ability to speak on any bill. So Representative, when you're ready, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Good to see you all. Good morning, Senator Lucchini, Representative Chiazzo, and members of the Committee on Veterans and Legal Affairs. I am Nicole Gorhauski, and I represent the communities of Ellsworth and Trenton in the Maine House. I appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of LD 231, an act to establish open primaries. Whenever I'm weighing decisions and votes in Augusta or this year from home via Zoom with you all, my colleagues scattered across the state, I aim to stay grounded in the community I represent. It's clear to me from the conversations I've had at doors and around my district these past few years that many of us share the same values, and I think that holds true across all of Maine. We work hard, help our neighbors, and believe that a person's character is what matters most. We also value our civic duty to participate in the political process, turning out to vote at a rate that is the envy of the nation. Yet currently, our political process isn't living up to our shared values. That is why I support LD 231, which would allow semi-open primaries, meaning that unenrolled voters, often referred to as independents here in Maine, would be permitted to cast one ballot in the party primary of their choice. As you heard, Republicans would not be able to vote in Democratic primaries, and Democrats would not be able to vote in Republican primaries. There is a saying that all politics are local, and in Hancock County, 30% of registered voters are unenrolled and therefore currently unable to participate in primary elections without jumping through hoops. These are friends and neighbors who are registered to vote, engaged in the political process, and paying for elections in which they are not permitted to participate. This status quo is not in line with our values, and I believe our electorate deserves better. Fortunately, LD 231 will address our flawed system. Opening Maine's primaries to unenrolled voters will improve voter access and increase voter participation. It means that our unenrolled friends will be able to more fully participate in a system for which they are already paying, without having to temporarily affiliate with a party. Unenrolled voters are no more or less informed than other voters, and I believe we would benefit from hearing from them. Mainers are practical and appreciate common sense solutions to problems that need not exist. Semi-open primaries aren't cutting edge. 9 states already allow for them, including nearby New Hampshire and Massachusetts. In fact, Maine is only one of 14 states that has completely closed primaries. For a state that values and takes pride in their voter participation, it's clear we can do better. Mainers want to make this change. 80% of Maine voters support semi-open primaries. Yes, 80%. There are few issues with this much consensus, and I hope you will recognize the will of the people and join me in supporting LD 231. Thank you for considering this important reform to our voting system, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Representative Gorhauski. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Representative. Always good to see you. Up next, we will recognize Representative Zager from Portland. Sir, you're free to speak on any of the bills, but I think you're signed up for 231, but you're free to speak to any of them if you like.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was going to testify on LD 231 and LD 303.
Yep, no worries, go ahead.
Representative Chiazzo, other honorable members of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee. I am Sam Zager, a military veteran representing the good people of District 41 in Portland. Pleased to testify on these bills. I'm in support because of the following reasons. Number one, I think that this semi-open primary model would be good for military veterans. Perhaps the fact that half of veterans are unenrolled or independent is a residual effect of being in the service. This is considerably higher than the 32% for the general population in Maine. U.S. soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen don't take an oath to a person or a political party, as happens in other places. Instead, we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution and the ideals embodied therein. I know this committee is well aware of this. The distinction is at the heart of the American enterprise. Last summer, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, responded to congressional questions, and he said simply, "I believe deeply in the principle of an apolitical U.S. military. Even though military members and veterans are certainly entitled to have political views, having spent 11 years working with and listening to others in uniform, I understand why a veteran might be reluctant to join a political party. I don't think that Maine ought to keep that veteran from having a meaningful voice or a meaningful vote in places where their officials are determined in the primary." The second reason is that it would be good for all voters. Last week, Senator Hickman wrote an op-ed in the Portland Press Herald in which he stated that we have a responsibility to do everything in our power to proactively ensure that all eligible voters are permitted to vote, including our friends and neighbors who are registered to vote, but not enrolled in a political party. I agree. The third reason is that it's strongly desired by Mainers. The best available polling shows that 4 out of 5 Mainers, including Democrats and Republicans, very clearly express a desire for independents to be eligible to vote in Maine's primaries. If we believe that people's voices ought to be heard in a representative democracy, then opening up primaries to independent voters makes sense. Fourth is that all Maine voters are paying for the primaries, whether they're enrolled in a political party or not. One suggestion that I would make as you consider these bills is some sort of additional funding for clean elections candidates in the primaries. Like many other members of this legislature, I ran under the Maine Clean Elections Act. So my entire campaign had $3,650 to spend in the primary. In my district, it was largely determined, the race was essentially determined in the primary. There were two others in the primary, and one of the candidates spent more than 3 times what I was allowed to spend. People often can't believe it when I tell them how Spartan MCEA budgets are. This bill would have the unintended consequence of making it even harder for clean election candidates to take their message to primary voters because they'd have to reach more voters in the primary. One way to account for this and to minimize the fiscal impact would be to increase funding only for MCEA candidates who are running in a primary with traditionally funded candidates. I recognize that this adds a layer of complexity to the bill. I thank you so much for your service and consideration of these proposals. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Thank you, Representative Zager. Any questions for the representative while we have him here? Okay, seeing none, thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Up next, we will recognize Representative Bailey from Gorham. Representative Bailey, when you're ready, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator Lucchini, Representative Caiazzo, and distinguished colleagues on the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee. I'm appearing before you this morning to testify in favor of LDs 231 and 303 and in opposition to LD 1121. I have, through happenstance, developed some expertise on the topic of voting systems and the type of elections and types of elections in recent years, including the nature of these bills. And I wanted to share my perspective. Should it be helpful to you in deliberating here? With regards to 231 and 303, both of which seek to establish what's called semi-open primaries, I've come to feel strongly that all Maine voters should have the opportunity to participate in taxpayer-funded elections. That was not always the case for me. There was a time when I would have not supported these bills. I thought that Democrats should be able to vote in Democratic primaries, Republicans should vote in Republican primaries, case closed. But over time, my views have changed on this issue based on evidence from primaries in the majority of states that have some form of open primaries. And I think the harm that has been demonstrated, and to me, at least from excluding unenrolled voters from primaries. I also took the time to reflect on this issue through the lens of my shared values: fairness, openness, inclusion, values that I think we all share as Mainers. I see 3 possible options to address this issue that the committee could consider. One is to enact semi-open primaries to allow unenrolled voters to participate in the primary of their choice, like a majority of states already allow. The second might be to require that political parties pick up the tab for their primary elections that only members of their party may participate in. And the third option that some states have deployed is to make voter registration nonpartisan and allow voters, when they arrive to vote, to request the primary ballot they would like. A number of states already have nonpartisan voter registration. Maine is one of only a dozen states with closed primaries. None of the other states that with semi-open primaries have problems with cross-partisan undermining of elections and no problems with awarding presidential delegates. Furthermore, many of the states with some form of open primaries have actually very strong political parties. There's no evidence that semi-open primaries in any way weakens political parties. In fact, I've come to believe the opposite might be true, and I could see how semi-open primaries might strengthen parties by bringing more people into the party primary process, helping them to recognize their partisan lean and perhaps even joining that party in time. With regards to LD 1121, I appreciate the intent of Senator Baldacci to open up the political process. However, I don't support limiting the number of choices in a general election to only 2 candidates. Voter participation in general elections, as you know, is significantly higher than primaries. In fact, Maine has some of the lowest voter participation in primaries on record during the past 2 decades. So restricting the number of voters who get to decide who advances to a general election limits the choice and voice of voters. In essence, the electorate in primaries skews older, wider, more partisan. If this bill perhaps allowed 4 candidates to advance to a nonpartisan, through a nonpartisan primary to the general election, I might support it with a caveat. The legislature and voters must first approve of ranked choice voting for the 3 state general elections that the Maine Supreme Judicial Court has issued a non-binding advisory opinion on that's interpreted the plurality provisions in Maine's constitution to mean pick one plurality voting, so that in that case you would have a nonpartisan primary, and then perhaps the top 4 plurality winners from that primary would advance to the general. Then you'd use ranked choice voting to ensure a majority winner and prevent vote splitting, etc. However, until we resolve the issue of ranked choice voting, I don't think that issue is on the table to allow some sort of top 4, or even the top 5 system like Alaska and some other states have either adopted or are considering. So I hope that information is helpful. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Representative Bailey. Any questions for the representative while we have him here? All right, seeing none, thank you, sir, for your testimony.
Thank you.
I believe that concludes everybody in the attendee list and who signed up as co-sponsors. So we can move on to the public hearings, or the public portion of the public hearing, and I will turn it over to Senator Lucchini to start that process off.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a reminder, we have merged all 3 bills together, so we'll give everybody 4 minutes to speak. But just a reminder to, when you get called in, to state your name, your place of residence, and the organization you represent, if any. And so we'll begin with Alicia Barnes, followed by Anna Keller and Betsy Sweet.
Hello,
welcome, Alicia. Yep.
Hello, Senator Lucchini, Representative Chiazzo, and members of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee. My name is Alicia Barnes, and I currently live in Augusta. I'm here testifying as a veteran who defended the Constitution to defend it again in support of allowing all eligible Mainers to participate in our elections, whether they choose to join a party or not, by supporting LD 231, an act to establish open primaries. Shortly after I enlisted in the Navy, my ship, the USS Kearsarge, deployed to the Persian Gulf with 6 other ships and 10,000 Marines for Operation Iraqi Freedom. We went to war. I enlisted for many reasons, a sense of duty and a commitment to country, but the Navy also helped me put food on my family's table and keep a roof over their head. This was especially important for my son, who was a toddler when I deployed. I am grateful for my time in the Navy and for the opportunities it provided me, and I have done my best to pay it forward. I sat on the board of the Betsy Ann Ross House of Hope, a transitional home for homeless female veterans and their children, and served as the peer support lead for a veteran support group at Togus VA. And I am here today to respectfully ask that you vote in support of LD 231. Veterans are more affected by Maine's closed primary laws than nearly any other group. Nationally, 49% of veterans identify as political independents. Many of us have gone to war to protect our democratic ideals, and yet here in Maine, we are prohibited from fully participating in our democratic process. This is shameful. My fellow veterans who are eligible to vote should be permitted to do so, even if they have chosen not to enroll in a political party. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from members of the committee at this time? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Okay, next up we have Anna Keller, followed by Betsy Sweet, and followed by George Simonson.
Good morning, Senator Lucchini, Representative Chiazzo, members of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee. My name is Anna Keller. I'm a resident of Portland, and I'm here today as Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Maine. The League of Women Voters of Maine believes that primary elections should encourage broad voter participation and that all voters should have the opportunity to participate in the primary election of their choice. More specifically, LWVME supports semi-open primaries over the various forms of closed or fully open primaries for candidate selection at all governmental levels. Unenrolled voters in Maine comprise 33% of Maine's voters, a larger group than either registered Republicans or registered Democrats. Among veterans, 49% are unenrolled, as are 50% of millennials. With the implementation of automatic voter registration, the percentage of unenrolled voters may increase. When unenrolled voters are excluded from party primaries, their candidate options are limited by more partisan voters and may have limited appeal to the election at large. In jurisdictions dominated by a single party, the candidate who wins the primary party is essentially guaranteed to win the general election. Given the significant and structural institutional supports that buttress the two-party system in American politics, and given the very high likelihood that one of the major party candidates will win any given election, the League supports broad participation in that selection process. While unenrolled voters in Maine can vote in the party primaries by registering a party preference on the day of the election, eliminating the registration requirement would reduce the psychological barrier of those voters who do not want to declare a party, and the paperwork required of voters and local election officials would be reduced. Compelling voters to become a member of a party in order to vote in a primary is not only a needless burden, it also violates their right to refrain from joining a party if they choose. The well-known constitutional freedom of association also entails the freedom not to associate. The League of Women Voters of Maine gives its highest priority to policy principles that protect and expand voter participation and turnout in all elections, including candidate selection systems. We believe that primary elections should encourage broad voter participation and that all voters should have the opportunity to participate in the primary election of their choice. For that reason, we support LD 231, and thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from committee members at this time? Seeing none, thank you. Okay, next up we have Betsy Sweet, followed by George Simonson, and then Lane Sturdivant. Welcome, Betsy.
Thank you, Senator Lucchini. Good morning, and Representative Chiazzo and members of the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee. My name is Betsy Sweet, and I am from Hallowell, Maine, and I'm here this morning on behalf of Open Primaries for Maine in favor of LD 231. I have been an advocate of the State House for almost 39 years now, and have spent most of that time encouraging Maine citizens of all interests and political persuasions to get involved in the democratic process by running for office, advocating for a cause, and first and foremost, always to vote. And honestly, I believe that right now we are at a critical juncture in this country and in this state. Many, many people are cynical about our democracy, about their voice or participation mattering, or even believing that politicians want them involved. At its core, I believe that LD 231 addresses that cynicism in a meaningful way and says, yes, you do matter, and yes, we do want you involved. You have already heard what this bill does, allowing unenrolled voters to participate in a primary. I will confess, about 10 years ago when I first heard about this idea, my reaction was negative. I thought, if you want to be in a primary, then register for a party. But as I started learning more and started watching what that really meant, here was what we see. Today, we see that almost a third of our voters register as unenrolled, that you've heard. Big swaths of people that we all want to be involved, you and I and all Mainers, 49% of veterans, 40% of currently enlisted people, over 50% of young people, and many, many union members and new Americans are registered as unenrolled, and as a result are locked out of the primary process. At the same time, in Maine and across the country, more and more races are decided in the primaries, almost 70%, and the general election is just a formality. That was certainly true for a number of you on this committee. So these big swaths of people being unable to participate in the very foundation of our democracy, voting when it counts, are shut out. But it doesn't have to be this way. LD 231 provides a path that says, yes, we want you in. We want as many people as possible to participate in this process. We do not fear more people voting. We welcome it. It strengthens people's belief in our democratic system. It makes people remove that veil of cynicism that says parties only care about themselves and their ideology. And I believe it makes for stronger candidates that have to appeal to a wide variety of people from the start. And just to be clear, this is not a radical or even cutting edge idea. Over 80% of Maine people support this proposal, and Maine is only one of 14 states that do not do this. So many of the fears that you may have or have heard about simply just do not occur. This is our chance to expand democracy, to encourage participation, and to restore faith in the democratic process. Let Mainers, all Mainers, know that their voice matters. Please vote yes on LD 231.
Representative Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Betsy, I keep thinking about sort of, this is a big change. And as you said, 10 years ago, you were against it. It it's a change. So we have to think it through. And, you know, I look at the pros and cons, and, you know, definitely the pros is it brings more people into the process, and we have more and more unenrolled voters, and bringing them in to participate more, I think, would be good. The con that I keep trying to think about is negativity. That I can't stand all the negativity in our campaigns. And is there sort of like a chance that this will increase negativity because you'll have people saying, well, let's vote for the Democrat that we want to have against our Republican, but not really the Democrat that we think is the best. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm trying to get that straight in my brain. Is how do we try to get rid of that possibility of this actually increasing negativity in our campaigns?
Great, that's a great question, Representative Wood. And so here's the thing that we hear often, that people are like, oh my gosh, someone's going to rig it. You know, they're going to go after the Democrats are going to go after the independents and say, vote in the Republican primary and vote for the weakest candidate, or vice versa. And so even though that is a theoretical possibility, first of all, imagine, like all of you who get votes, imagine what that's like, right? So you're in a party, you have to convince a large number of people who aren't in your party to vote for someone that they don't like in another party, right? In order for your party. I mean, it's just so many steps. We have a hard time getting people to vote for the people that we want them to vote for. And so it's just a really, really unlikely scenario. And it hasn't happened. And there was a case in one state where they thought that this might have happened. And when they did research into it, it didn't happen at all. So I don't think that happens. And in terms of the actual negativity of campaigns, I think the broader group of people that you're trying to appeal to, the less likely it is that this, combined with ranked choice voting, that you aren't going to engage in that kind of negativity about personal, individuals and campaigns. So I think that those are fears. I get that, because it's a change, but it is not fears that are founded in any reality, I think.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm just trying to think that through.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's awesome. Thank you.
I guess, Ms. Sweet, since current law lets the parties allow unenrolled voters if they want to, has your group advocated within parties to invite other members to participate in the primaries, or have you only worked on state law?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've only at this point worked on state law. I mean, I think that is another way to go. But again, I think it's a statement of the state and a statement of the democratic institution, little d, democratic institution of our government, to say we want as many people as involved to vote. And we want the parties to encourage people to vote as well. And we want people to give a voice. The thing I've heard as I've campaigned all over the state in the last couple of years is people believe that their vote, people don't care, that they don't matter, that their voice does not matter. And there's a lot of cynicism, and I particularly see it with young people who I think all of us are anxious and desperate to get young people to participate. But when we say you can only participate if you want to be part of this system that they view as pretty broken, I think it's not a message that sells.
Right. I'm not arguing any message. Just curious if your group has tried to make parties change from within.
No, but we have worked with both parties, and I know that both of them are moving very much, I think, quickly to saying that this is a good idea.
Okay. Any further questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next we have George Simonson, followed by Lane Sturdivant and Tom Waddell.
Good morning, everyone. And in particular, Senator Lucchini and Representative Chiazzo. My name is George Simonson, and I live in Harpswell. Also, I grew up in Connecticut with Italians, so I know all about Chiazzo. And good morning to the committee. Thank you for your work. It's a pleasure to see you all in gear here. It's very interesting. I would like to say a couple of brief words in support of LD 231 and the related bills. 86% of Americans believe that our government is broken in various ways. 43% of us, a plurality, including fully 50% of millennials, identify as politically independent. They do not wish to be members of any of the existing parties. Yet these people are our future. So it's no wonder that 70% of Americans support open primaries. You should too. The primaries are conducted with taxpayer money. The closed presidential primaries of 2020, for example, cost taxpayers $250 million, yet left out 30 million voters. That's not American. No one should be required to join a political party to vote. Here in Maine, establishing open primaries would bring us one step closer to a true democracy. I urge you to support LD 231 and the related bills. Let's let all voters vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simonson. Any questions from the committee at this time? Okay, seeing none, thank you for testifying today. Okay, next up, we have Lane Sturdivant, followed by Tom Waddell and William Weber.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator Lucchini and Representative Chiazzo and other members of the committee. My name is Lane Sturdivant. I'm a resident of South Thomaston, and I'm testifying in support of LD 231, an act to establish open primaries. I'm a proud voter, but I'm also a proud independent voter. So for every primary election, I wrestle with the question of whether I'm willing to sacrifice my independent voter status in order to vote for my preferred candidate. This is a dilemma that many, most even, of my friends face every primary election in Maine. Voters my age in our 20s and 30s are far more likely to identify as independents than older voters. According to a Pew Research Center, 44% of millennials, those born between 1981 and 1996, call themselves independents, in comparison to 39% of Gen Xers and 32% of baby boomers. And sure, we can always change our party affiliation back to unenrolled after 3 months. But 3 months after last July's primary, the pandemic was still raging, and I was weighing whether the trip to the town office to become an independent voter on paper again was worth the risk to my health. I'm from Vermont. My sister's an independent, my parents are independents, my grandparents are independents, my great aunt is an independent. Being an independent is not merely a marker of my generation, it is a part of my family heritage and my cultural identity. My family members in Vermont have never been required to sacrifice their independent voter status in order to vote. They struggle to fathom why I have to. Aren't you more likely to vote for a party candidate in the general election if you're able to vote for that candidate in the primary? They ask me. Well, yes, I reply. Aren't you more likely to volunteer for a party candidate's campaign if you're invited to have a say in it as early as the primary? They ask. Well, yes, I reply again. Why do your state's political parties believe that you would vote for their candidates when they shut you out of their primaries? They ask. To that, I can only shrug. To them, it's common sense to include independents in primaries because it gets independents more invested in party candidates who might appear on the general election ballot. I wish Maine had an open primary system like Vermont, but I would settle for being able to vote in primaries without having to negate my independence every time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from members of the committee at this time? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, we have Tom Waddell, followed by William Weber. And after that, Martin Groman. Welcome.
Welcome. Senator Lucchini and Representative Chiazzo and the committee members. My name is Tom Waddell. I live in Litchfield and I am testifying in support of LD 231. After the last election, the losing party took voter suppression to dangerous levels in many states. Fortunately, the Maine legislature is discussing LD 231, an act that combats voter suppression by letting independents vote in partisan primaries. At first glance, it seems counterintuitive for those not enrolled to decide who will represent a party in the general election. Looking a little deeper, though, one sees inconsistencies in our voting laws. Who pays for primaries? What do primaries What part do primaries play in the complete election process? And what voting limits are consistent with the hallmark of democracy, which is electing candidates who represent the most voters? Everyone's taxes pay for primaries, but independents receive no benefit from taxes they pay for primaries. An impartial law would require political parties to finance primaries or allow every registered voter to vote. A more nuanced perspective of that argument recognizes that primaries are the first step in an election process that requires 2 elections to elect politicians. Preventing independents from voting in primaries is suppressing their right to vote in the complete election process. Opposition to increasing voter turnout in Maine is part of a national effort to suppress voter turnout. The Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation are leaders in the national effort to suppress voter turnout. Paul Weyrich founded these organizations based on voter suppression. In 1980, Weyrich spoke to 15,000 Christian conservatives, and I quote, Paul Weyrich said, "I know many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people, and they never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in elections quite candidly goes up as the voting population goes down. LD 231 will increase voter turnout. As voting population goes up, democracy and the people win. Restricting primary voting to the party faithful is the key to allowing divisive partisan politics to prevail. I urge this committee to vote that LD 231 ought to pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee at this time? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Okay, next up we have William Weber, followed by the Honorable Marty Groman and Jill Martell. So welcome, Mr. Weber.
Thank you, and good morning, Senator Lucchini, Representative Chiazzo, and members of the Committee on Veterans and Legal Affairs. I am William Weber, a longtime resident of Portland, Maine, and an enthusiastic voter. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today in support of LD 231, an act to establish open primaries. I am passionate about voting, as you can see from my wallpaper, and I have not missed a local, state, or federal election in over 30 years. As a volunteer with AARP in the last election cycle, our team worked tirelessly with town clerks and municipal officials around the state to inform our membership of how to stay safe and make their votes count during the pandemic. I believe voting is one of the most important responsibilities a citizen in a democracy would have. I would like every citizen to have the same determination and passion to make their voice heard. But unfortunately, a large percentage of registered voters in Maine are unenrolled and are barred from an important aspect of selecting our candidates in the party primaries. Regrettably, Maine typically has low voter turnout in our primaries, which means that fewer and fewer Mainers are actually deciding on who the candidates will be. I was immensely proud of our new Secretary of State, Shannon Bellows, when she testified to Congress earlier this year on the best practices that Maine has adopted to lower barriers to citizen voting. But Maine could do so much better by allowing roughly a third of our registered voters who are unenrolled to participate in the selection process of the major candidates. Maine is definitely on the wrong side of this issue and is part of a small minority of states that do not allow unenrolled registered voters to cast a ballot in the primaries. As Maine starts to adopt automatic voter registration, the number of millennials that identify as independent or unenrolled will increase. The chart I submitted with my written testimony is excerpted from a Pew Research study on the increasing number of millennials across the country who have registered as independent. As I've grown older and perhaps wiser, I have become increasingly partisan. And up until a few years ago, I was against allowing non-party members to cast votes in our party primaries. But as our main political parties have drifted further apart ideologically, it is clear the independent voter plays a large role in determining the ultimate winner. Therefore, it does not make any sense to exclude unenrolled registered voters from the candidate selection process. Both parties would benefit from having stronger candidates that appeal to the broader base of voters and not to the fringe elements in their party. Today, our nation is at a critical station where our democracy is threatened, where our elected leaders are attempting to choose their voters rather than the voters choosing the elected leaders. Maine can do the right thing and end the disenfranchisement of hundreds of thousands of Mainers in the candidate selection process by enacting LD 231. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Any questions from members of the committee at this time? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have the Honorable Marty Groman. Welcome. It's good to see you. And he'll be followed by, I don't see Jill Martell in the room, but Joe Pickering and John Long. So welcome.
Great. Thank you, Senator Lucchini, Representative Cazzo. Thank you to the committee for all you're doing and all your hard work. I'm here in my individual capacity to testify in support of LD 231. I want to thank you just for digging into this issue. As you can imagine, as an independent, I believe in this. I think we've all had this experience as running for our various offices where you shake hands at the polls, and it's kind of remarkable, isn't it, the difference in turnout when you're there in June versus when you're there in November. And I've always thought it was kind of a shame. A lot of times in June, there'll be other things on the ballot besides primaries. For example, bond issues and so forth are often run at that time, but people that just, don't show up because they don't have the opportunity to vote in those other in the primaries, and so that's always kind of hung with me. And I think also, hearing the testimony this morning has been kind of affecting. I want to point out that this is very open. I commend all of you for this time here, where you're not around the horseshoe. Obviously, I frankly probably would not have come to Augusta to testify this morning on this issue, even though I am passionate about it. But this is very open, and I think it's a nice parallel to what we're talking about here, where you can hear from all these voices. But Representative Zager, who I've never met personally, but to hear from veterans that this is something that they're interested in is kind of affecting for me too. So I want to thank you for pursuing this. I know it's a complex issue, and the committee will have tons of hard work to get it to where you want it to be. But the issue of semi-open primaries has my enthusiastic endorsement, and I'm happy to help in any way to move it along if I could do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee at this time? Seeing none, thanks for your testimony, Marty.